Hey everyone, it's Kenji, and I'm going to be making some carnitas. So I think I've made a few videos on carnitas before because I make it pretty frequently, but I'm making it again, so I thought I'd take another video. I'm making it a little different from the last time because I have less pork than I normally do. I got a big pork shoulder, Boston butt, a shoulder roast, and I'm going to roast part of it and just eat it as a pork roast. But I trimmed off a bunch because the pork roast is too big, and so I decided I'm going to use that trim to make some carnitas. So carnitas, typically made with a mix of different pork parts, so it could be, so by the way, carnitas is a Mexican pork dish, slow cooked pork, generally cooked in its own fat. The way it's traditionally made is you'll have these big sort of copper vessels, and you take a mix of different pork cuts. So it could be pork shoulder, it could be some skin, maybe some of the face meat, maybe some ears, whatever, all different parts of the pig, and you cook it in lard, in rendered pig fat, very slowly in this big copper pot, kind of stirred around with a giant wooden paddle. And it's one of those things where, over time, the pork fat is retained, and so the next batch will go in there. So over the course of a day, over the course of, a week or a month or a year, or maybe, in some cases, maybe even decades, some or all of that pork fat will be retained from batch to batch, so that as you cook a subsequent batch, you get more and more sort of roasty pork flavors in there, as opposed to just sort of cleaner, pure pork flavors. Because, of course, every time you heat it, you are kind of toasting up some of that fat and getting it a little bit brown. I'm going to make it inside. Actually, you know what? This copper pot's a little bit too small. I'm going to grab a cast iron. I'll do it inside here. The vessel you do it in, you don't have to do it in a copper vessel like they do, like the real traditional ones are done, obviously. I don't have a giant copper vessel at home, so I'm going to do it in this cast iron pan here. What you do want to do, though, is have it fit kind of snugly in there. You don't want a ton of room because the more room you have, you want the pork to mainly be, be about 50 to 70% covered in fat at least. And if your vessel is too big, you're going to have to add a lot of extra fat to it. So, that fat could be lard that you buy. It could be lard that you've rendered yourself. It could be, if you want, it could be like something like duck fat, or I'm going to use oil. So what we're doing, I got pork here. Let me just wash my hands real quick. So at home, I'm just using pork shoulder. That's typically what I use to make carnitas with. You want something with plenty of fat. Pork shoulder has a nice ratio of fat to lean. It's going to be very tender when you braise it. So pork shoulder cut into very large dice like that. This is a couple pounds. You can do whatever fits inside whatever vessel you have. So you can do this in a cast iron pan. You can do it in a baking dish. You could do it in a Dutch oven. Anything that's going to fit inside your oven and is oven safe is going to work. I'm taking an onion, just quartering it up here, and kind of nestling it into that pork. Okay. I'm going to take a couple, say, I don't know, 4 garlic cloves. And again, the amount of pork you have doesn't really matter as long as it fits inside one vessel and that fits inside the oven. The timing is going to be essentially the same whether you're making, I'm making maybe 2.5 pounds here. It's going to be the same whether you're making 2.5 pounds or 20 pounds. As long as it fits in a vessel, in your oven, everything is essentially the same. You can increase or decrease the ratio of aromatics to your taste. So a few garlic cloves here I'm putting in as well. So because, in Mexico, when you get this at a place that recycles its lard, it picks up more and more flavor. Those things are always going to be a little bit tastier than what you can make at home. That said, you can make it really well at home as well. I'm very happy with the way it comes out. So I'm going to season just a little bit of salt. You don't need to put a ton of salt right now. In fact, you can put no salt right now if you want to just save it all for the end. I'm just doing a little salt because I grabbed it and felt like it. All right. I got a navel orange. Are navel oranges navel like the belly button or navel like the, like the village people? I don't know. All right, I'm going to squeeze that orange over the pork. If you have access to something like a bitter orange, if you have access to like a Latin market where you can get bitter oranges, those are great in this. But any kind of orange will do. Even like a mandarin or like a clementine, something like that will work fine as well. But the bitterness is really nice with the aroma. Just a little bit of bitterness goes a long way in a dish like this. All right, so I'm going to nestle those orange chunks into there as well. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of fat. I mean, you might think this is a lot of fat, but it's not like you're going to eat all this at the end. But we want basically just enough fat that the pork starts to get covered, so that the fat does a couple things. First of all, it helps distribute heat evenly so that this all cooks nice and evenly. It distributes flavors, like the oils in the orange are fat soluble. A lot of the aromas in the bay leaves here, which I stuck in, and the onions and garlic are fat soluble. So those are kind of mingle with the fat and then work their way between the muscle fibers of the meat as they start to cook and separate. So adding enough fat to just at least partially cover the pork is an important step here. And finally, I'm just gonna cover this up. I'm using a lid. If you want, you could use foil, you could use parchment. These days I try and use as little disposable things as possible. Oh, you know what I forgot? Let's stick a cinnamon stick in there. Let's just do one right in the middle. And as you'll see at the end, as we kind of shred this pork up, even though, most of that cinnamon flavor is going to be concentrated around the cinnamon stick, obviously, we're going to get plenty of flavor through the whole dish partially because the aromatic molecules travel around. If you can smell it, it's also going to be getting around the meat. So partly because it travels around, also because we're going to be shredding up that pork and kind of mixing it up later. All right, so I got a 275-degree oven. It's going to be in here basically until it's tender enough that you can shred it apart with a fork. So that should take, I would say, about 3.5 hours, but I'll check back and I will let you know exactly when. 275-degree oven, and I will see you in 3.5 hours. All right, so it's been, actually a little over 3.5 hours because I was in the middle of recording a podcast when this finished cooking, but I checked on it and it is definitely done. So the way you check on it to see if it's done is you want to, look at that. You want to poke it. I'm using a cake tester. You could use you can use like a paring knife, something like that. You could use a fork also, but you want to poke it and make sure that there's really no resistance when you go into the meat there. So if you poke it with a knife, you should be able to twist it and see sort of the meat fibers kind of separate apart without really feeling like you're pushing through much. So now at this point, you can just let this cool, let it cool at room temperature for maybe about an hour and then throw it in the fridge overnight. All that fat will solidify and then the next day you can deal with it. Otherwise, you can also sort of immediately start working with it if you want to cook it, if you want to eat it for dinner tonight, say. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pick out all of the aromatics who have given up their aroma. The onion I might actually save. That onion you can blend into if you're going to make a salsa. So the recipe that I have published on Serious Eats and in my book, you take some of the juices from in here and some of the vegetables and you blend them into a salsa with some roasted tomatillos and other ingredients, and they come out, the salsa comes out really delicious. It gets a nice sort of porky flavor to it. But for now, I'm just going to throw them off to the side. I might make them into a salsa later. The oranges, there's not much you can do with them. The cinnamon stick, not much you can do with that at this point. And the bay leaves are also kind of toast at this point. Oh, sounds like the kids are awake. Oh, it's okay. All right, so I'm not going to finish this right now. I'm just going to let this cool, throw it in the fridge because we're not eating this today. But what I will do is I'll take off a little chunk and sort of show you what texture you're looking for. All right, a little salt. So at this point, it should be really kind of completely fork tender. So you see how it just kind of shears apart. Super juicy and tender. All right. I will come back and show you what I'm going to do with this tomorrow. So I will see you another 30 seconds later. You know what? I changed my mind. I am, this looks too good, so I'm going to eat some right now. I'll show you the way I'm going to do it. So I have, I think, another video. I certainly have a recipe where I finish this off under the broiler, kind of shred it with a couple forks and then finish it off under the broiler, which is a great way to do it if you are going to you know, you want a big tray of this stuff to serve a bunch of people at the dinner table. But if you don't have that much, you know, I only have like a couple pounds of it here, so it's pretty easy to just do it in a skillet. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a couple of chunks of these. I'll show you how to make one of these tacos. You know, so this pork is essentially cooked where if this was in France, if you were talking about French food, you would call this like confit. You know, when you kind of preserve meat and cook and preserve meat in its own fat. But we're not going to call it that because we're not in France. All right, so I'm kind of shredding it into kind of largish chunks like that. And then I'm going to get that with its own fat into kind of hot skillet here. We're going to let that crisp up a little bit on there. Get a little extra fat on there. This fat you can strain and reserve and use for the next time you make carnitas if you want. And then the other thing you can do with the fat is take your tortillas, kind of get them a little bit fatty like that, and then use that fat to moisten them for your taco. This is a very large taco I'm making. I don't know where I got these giant tortillas from. So I'm going to lay them on top so that as that meat crisps up, it also steams through to the tortilla and heats it all up. I don't have any toppings. I don't have any salsa to put in here today. But what I do have is obviously some of these onions that have also been cooked, you know, confit in pork fat. Chop some of those up. They're going to be nice and sweet. I got, oh, you know what I do have? I have a little bit of the Yucateco hot sauce. And I have some of this cranberry sauce, which I made today. I'll have a video about this as well, but I made today using essentially the same. I made it because it uses essentially the same flavoring ingredients as the pork did. So this cranberry sauce is flavored with the other half of that orange that I put in the pork, and it's also flavored with a cinnamon stick. So I think that actually might go really nicely on top of this taco type thing I'm making. I guess it's not a taco type thing. It is a taco. All right. I'm gonna scrape this up and flip it over to get some extra crispy bits going. You can see how nice and crispy it gets in its own fat. And that's really sort of the magic for me of good carnitas, is that they are juicy and crispy. So you get that combination of like the really crispy bits on the bites, so the really crispy edges, but the really juicy sort of almost melt in your mouth, tender pork underneath. Yeah, I'll throw one of those garlic cloves in there too. All right. I think I might have overdone it on the amount of pork fat on here, but that's all right. We'll have an extra fatty taco. Alrighty. Let's get this onion and garlic mixture on here. Use a little bit more salt. If I had a lime, I would use it, but you know what? This cranberry sauce is going to be plenty tart. Yum. And a little bit of the habanero salsa. I always underestimate how spicy this stuff is. Ooh. Alrighty. Yeah, Hamon, you can have some. Here. Good boy. Oh, wow. Look at this, huh? Maybe I didn't overdo it with the pork fat. It came out nice and tender, crisp, the way I like my tortillas. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cranberry sauce on tacos. Cranberry sauce on carnitas. I approve. This is so good, I'm not even going to bother walking over by the window to eat it. All right, everyone. I'm going to finish my lunch. I won't make you stand here listening to me eat it. I'll give Hamon one more little treat. Oop! There's some on your back of your neck, but here. There you go. All right, guys, gals, non-binary pals, carnitas are easy. You should make them. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.